Hello, this is Dr. Jeffrey Thibert, Assistant Director of National Fellowships in the Center for Undergraduate Scholarly Engagement, or CUSE, at the University of Notre Dame. And for the next 20-25 minutes or so, I will be doing a kind of last-minute check-in for the UK postgraduate scholarship applicants, last minute in the sense that it is coming up on our campus deadline to submit an application for a university endorsement for one of the UK postgraduate scholarships. So the goal here is not to go into great detail about application advice. There are other videos available for that at www.youtube.com/user/nd-fellowships. There's also advice available on the Fellows website, which I will direct you to in a minute. Hopefully you've already read through that information at this point. I'm recording this on August 7th, 2014. The campus deadline is in 12 days on August 19th. 2014 at noon. So again, hopefully you've kind of read the advice. You are nearing completion of the application. But rather than going over advice today, the main goal is to kind of check in, make sure you're up to date on the process of applying for these through Notre Dame. And I want to make sure that we also go over some kind of last minute tips, things that you should be definitely reviewing before you submit the application on the 19th. If you are watching this live, or even if you're watching it as a recording, feel free to email questions to me at any time at fellows@nd.edu. I'll be checking the email as I'm speaking here, so if you send me a question as I'm doing this, I'll see it and can address it here. But of course, anytime afterward, if you're watching this later, I'm happy to take questions through that email address. So to start, let's talk a little bit about what the process is going to look like. As I've said, August 19th at noon is the campus deadline. Note that it is at noon. The goal is that by then you will have submitted the complete application for university endorsement. The only way you would not have to submit this is if you are an alum applying just for the Mitchell Scholarship, or if you are just applying for the Gates-Cambridge Scholarship. Gates-Cambridge does not require a university endorsement, and the Mitchell Scholarship does not require a university endorsement if you are applying, if you are not currently a full-time student. In every other case, we would expect an application for university endorsement. Now, we'll talk a little bit about the application for university endorsement in a minute, but note that by August 19th, the idea is that it would be the complete application, which means for everyone a personal statement, a list of principal activities, your letters of recommendation, and then some additional pieces perhaps depending on the particular award that you're applying for. So the Marshall Scholarship has some additional essays, as does the Churchill Scholarship. We'll go over those requirements in a minute. So you would submit for August 19th, and then in the first and second week of September, we will be setting up interviews with the Campus Endorsement Committee. And I do not have the times for these yet, but it will most likely be the last 2 days of the first week of September, so probably the 4th and 5th, and then also probably the 8th and 9th. Those are the first days of the second week. You'll be assigned an interview time. If you need an excuse to get out of a class, we'll be able to give that to you. If you are working currently and your schedule is not flexible and there are truly only certain times when you'd be able to do the interview, you will be able to let me know that, and then I will try to schedule the interviews around your schedule. But if you're currently at Notre Dame taking classes, you'll just be assigned a time, and we will work around that with class excuses. Now, those interviews are truly interviews. You will be asked questions about your application. And there may be questions such as, why are you interested in applying for this, of course, but they are likely to ask specific questions about your application. Typically, committees are interested in hearing more details about particular elements of your application, hearing about why you're interested in certain things that you mentioned. They will often try to probe your knowledge of different topics. So if you express an interest in international development, for instance, they might ask you about some major recent works on international development, or your opinion on current initiatives within that field. They will expect you to have some knowledge of the field that you're proposing to study through these scholarships. So essentially, anything that is in your application is kind of fair game. Of course, they're not likely to know much about you beyond that, but if there are points in your application where you think you yourself could ask why or how, those are things that the committee might pick up on too. So if you're interested in kind of preparing for the interview, probably the best thing to do is to read over your application and really think about what you would add if people ask for more details about the things you mentioned. And if you say something in your application that's particularly striking or controversial, it's very likely the committee will pick up on that and follow up on that. So pay special attention to those sorts of things. Now, endorsement decisions should be ready by September 12th. I should note that it is possible that not everyone who submits an application for August 19th will receive an interview. It's also possible that not everyone who receives an interview will be endorsed. So if, based on the written application, the committee feels that your application just wouldn't be competitive, they may not invite you to interview. And then even if they do invite you to interview, it is possible that they will not endorse everyone. In past years, roughly half the people who applied have ended up being endorsed. It varies from about 1/3 to half. That number could be higher this year, it could be lower. But what the committee is trying to do is really just put forward people who they think will be competitive at the next level, people who are likely to receive an interview and then do well in an interview. So this campus application is quite important. Now, if you're endorsed, which again you'll know by September 12th, we will set up additional meetings so that you and I can discuss your application. If the committee had any kind of general comments, we can talk about that. And the final deadline will be September 30th. So Rhodes, Marshall, Mitchell all have their final deadlines at the very beginning of October. The final deadline for our endorsed candidates is September 30th, and we do that because we need to do some processing of the applications before that deadline. So you would have until September 30th to continue working on the application, but everything would have to be done by then. At that point, you will be uploading things into an official online application, and you will get more information about that with your endorsement. Now, I should note that the Gates Scholarship doesn't have a final deadline until October 15th, and the Churchill Scholarship, the final deadline for that isn't until early November. So the September 30th final deadline just applies to Rhodes, Marshall, and Mitchell. So the bottom line is you submit for the campus deadline on August 19th, you have interviews, you're endorsed by September 12th. If you are endorsed, your next key deadline is September 30th. And then we do have some additional steps beyond that, but we would talk more about those at the appropriate time. Now, let's talk a little bit about what the expectations are for the campus deadline. And to do this, I want to go to the Fellows website. Now, hopefully you have been here and you have done this already. But you would go to the fellowship site, fellows.nd.edu. You can go to UK All. Just click on that, and Forms for University Endorsement Applicants. You'll find that link, you click on that, and here's the information you need. Now again, you likely have already been here and done this, But everything you'll need to submit is detailed in this Part 3 University Endorsement Application. If you have not read the application advice that's under Part 4, I suggest you do that right away. There's some helpful information there about what's expected from these various essays and portions of the application. Now, let's move over and look specifically at the application. Here it is. And let's go back to the beginning here. So this is the endorsement application. So for the deadline, you can see it's August 19th. You will want to submit these first two cover pages where you essentially talk about what you are, it's basic information about you, which scholarships you're applying for, an endorsement for, and then which programs you're interested in. That should be pretty straightforward. Then note here, all applicants must submit items 1 and 2, letters of recommendation and list of principal activities. Now, the letters of recommendation, if you go to the end here, the submission instructions, you'll see that letters of recommendation should be sent directly to fellows@nd.edu. We have been in touch with the recommenders that you have confirmed with us, and we can follow up with them, but you should be sure to send them reminders of this deadline as well. They can also submit letters as hard copies if they would like. Now, it's important that we have all of your recommendations by August 19th. Now, if you don't think they're all going to be in, that won't disqualify you, but the applications will be going out to the committees on August 20th. And so anything that comes in after the deadline is something that the committees probably won't be able to take into account in their review. So you could have a recommendation letter submitted late, but it then most likely wouldn't factor into the endorsement decision. So it could be part of your final application if you are endorsed, but the committee here wouldn't be able to see it. So it is ideal that all your letters would be in. Now, it is possible for somebody to revise their letter of recommendation after the campus deadline, so even if they could just submit a draft, that would be fine. It's important to note that we don't expect separate letters at this point for separate scholarships if you're applying to more than one. So if you're applying to Rhodes and Marshall, you only need one set of letters at this point. But if you are endorsed, we will be contacting your recommenders with information about how to upload their letters into the separate system. They will ultimately have to create a letter for Rhodes and a letter for Marshall and upload those separately. But for the campus process, we don't require that. Now, you'll note that on page, we just went over this page here, and there's information about what are required from the letters of recommendation, but hopefully you've seen that. If you go to the next page, these are the requirements for specific scholarships. So if you are applying for the Rhodes, personal statement. If you're applying for the Marshall, there are 3 essays. Mitchell, personal statement. Churchill, these 4 statements. Now, it's important to note that, of course, if you're applying for Rhodes, Marshall, and Mitchell, say, you can just submit one personal statement for all of these, unless you want to submit separate personal statements, but we would only expect one. It's important to note that if you're applying for Rhodes or Mitchell, then the personal statement for any of these shouldn't be reviewed by anyone. So really the only way we would review your personal statement for feedback, or that anyone should be reviewing it, is if you are only applying for Marshall and or Churchill. But if Rhodes or Mitchell are part of your application portfolio, then you can't get feedback on your personal statement at all from anyone. So that would also follow for the endorsement committee. You would not be receiving feedback from them on that piece. So read over this information. It tells you what to submit, and there's more information about what's expected from each of these documents in the application advice document on the website that I pointed you to earlier. And then if you go to submission instructions, it clearly lays out here what you should submit, how the attachments should be created. If you read over this and have any questions, please let me know, but please do read this document from front to back carefully before you submit. These are the instructions, and these will make our application processing a lot easier if you do follow these instructions here. Now, just to kind of briefly say some things about the statements, I mean, the recommendations are hugely important to your application because that's where people confirm the kinds of things you talk about in your application and expand on them. So if a particular internship is something that comes up in your application as a key experience, it's useful to have a letter from someone who then can confirm what you accomplished through that internship and then expand on that, because you only have so many words to talk about many things you've done, whereas your recommender can focus in on a particular thing and give more detail. So hopefully that's something you, of course, have thought about already when choosing your recommenders. But after the recommendations, I mean, in fact, I think even more important than the recommendations are the statements that you're writing. And the personal statement is probably the most important of these, although for Marshall the other two are, I would say, equally important. Now, the personal statement, there's no formula, and this has hopefully become clear to you if you've watched other videos, if you've gotten other advice about this. What they want to see is that they want to get a sense of who you are, what you care about, and why. You want to show them that you've seriously engaged with some issue and that you are on track to go do something about that issue. So they like to see that you've sort of identified a mission for yourself, there's something you care about, that you've actually accomplished things leading toward that mission, and that you've engaged with it, perhaps even in an academic way. And then they like to hear about what your future goals are and how this experience through the scholarship will enable you to achieve your future goals. Now, there are a lot of different ways to talk about that, and there's no one structure, but that's the kind of thing it's usually useful to include in a personal statement. I will say that Rhodes is really looking for kind of fascinating, interesting, unique people. So don't be afraid to be authentic, to be an individual, to really show them who you are. But you also want to show them that you are seriously engaged with things in the world. So if you talk about some area of interest, you might reference some recent works on that topic or some things that you have encountered in class or in the media to show that this topic is something that you really do keep up with, something that you really are engaged in, that you're serious about it. Marshall also likes to see that authenticity, but they also place a little more weight on your program selection and your contributions to the UK. Because the Marshall funding comes from the British government, they take it seriously as a scholarship funding mechanism, and so they like to see that you have really researched programs in the UK and that you have identified particular programs that really are the best fit for you, and that you can make an argument for why you want to go to those programs that's as specific as possible. So if you're interested in Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, don't just sort of assume that it's enough to say that's what you're interested in, because those are really good schools. Give them reasons why. Are there particular people at those institutions? Are there particular topics being studied? Are there experiences you'll have access to in those places? Who will you be able to engage with there? What are your fellow students like? So don't just assume that you can say, well, I want to do this program at LSE and just kind of assume, because it's LSE, that will justify it. Obviously, it's a good program. They really want to see that you thought about why that particular program is useful to you. And again, for Marshall, that should apply to all the programs you're talking about. It should apply to anything in your first choice, and you should save room to talk a little bit about your second choice programs as well. That's important in the academic program essay for the Marshall Scholarship. But give them specific reasons, and if you found an interesting program that isn't at Oxford, Cambridge, LSE, that's a good thing. But again, still, you have to make sure that you convince them that you understand why that program is the most interesting program for you. As for ambassadorial potential, the main thing they want to see is that you have an understanding of the special relationship between the US and the UK, especially as it relates to your field. So you don't have to go into a whole history lesson about the special relationship, but if you're interested in some particular topic, try to do some research into how the US and the UK have interacted or have contributed to each other in the pursuit of that thing. So if you're interested in international development, how the US and UK work together on that issue. They like to see that you have a sense of that element of it, the collaboration with regard to your field. The other thing is how you're going to contribute to the UK. So come up with specific ways that you're going to contribute to the UK while you're there, and perhaps it's through volunteer work, perhaps it's through work you'll do at your academic institution, but also longer term. The British government is making an investment in you as someone who is going to strengthen the relationship between the US and the UK. In fact, I think their front page of their website makes it pretty clear. So let's actually just look at that really quickly. Here we go. As future leaders with a lasting understanding of British society, Marshall scholars strengthen the enduring relationship between the British and American peoples, their governments, and their institutions. This is what they want Marshall scholars to be doing. So think about that. Think about the aims of the thing as you're especially writing the ambassadorial potential essay, because that's the essay where they are going to look to see if you have ideas about how you're going to strengthen that connection between the US and the UK, short term and longer term. And that's an essay that can make a huge difference in the Marshall process. So I do think that the key here really is the personal statement, but the main goal there is to give them a sense of who you are, what you care about, why, and to try to go into detail. You don't just want to come across as someone who is well-meaning, someone who wants to do good things, because everybody will be like that. You want to show them that you've seriously engaged with an issue, whether through scholarly work or activism or service or maybe through all of those things, and that you've really thought about how you're going to go out and make a difference in the world. That you can talk about what interests you and why, and what you hope to do with this opportunity as a Rhodes Scholar or a Marshall Scholar. You want to show them that you are forward thinking about this, that you constructed your experiences in a way that have allowed you to come to a particular understanding of some issue or issues, and then you know where you're headed with all of this. So think about that as you're working on the personal statement. If you have any questions leading up to the August 19th deadline, you can contact me at fellows@nd.edu. If you haven't gone through and looked at the application advice video or read through the application advice document that's online, I encourage you to do that right away. But I'm happy to help in any way that I can prior to August 19th. And I look forward to seeing your applications then and talking with you during the interview process. So hope all is well, and thank you for listening.